Overwhelm happens to everyone, whether you're an HSP or not. Um, Elaine Aron talks about this in her book. There's a kind of a spectrum from being overwhelmed when you've got too much going on and it's just the system is too much for the system, or the other extreme of not having enough going on and there's boredom there. So these are the two poles. And whether you're an HSP or not an HSP, you can get to a place of overwhelm. Everyone has their limit. It's just that we HSPs tend to have a lower threshold for getting overwhelmed. We're already paying attention to a lot, and there's a lot of processing going on inside of us. And so it sometimes doesn't take too much extra to put us over the top. Now, overwhelm can be physical overwhelm, noise, smells, that kind of thing. It can be mental overload, work related things, too many projects, being pulled in too many different directions, fatigue, hunger. These things can also cause some overwhelm, and it can also be emotional. And so a lot of it is different relationship issues or desires that are not being fulfilled, or frustrations with life, as Byron Katie likes to say, arguing with what is, that causes that kind of emotional stress. So any of these things can overwhelm anyone, but for HSPs, it can happen more quickly. So there are two main control points for overwhelm in any situation. One is kind of practical. You can leave the situation or change the situation. If you're able to do either of those things, then the stressor is removed. So what was bothering me is no longer bothering me. So if it's a loud noise, if I leave that area, then that loud noise is no longer bothering me. If it's an emotional kind of situation, maybe you're having an argument or something like that, then sometimes just taking a break from that and just saying, okay, I'm overwhelmed at this point. Sometimes people use the word flooded. I love that word. It's like I'm flooded. And so continuing to discuss at this point is not going to do any good. Let's take a break and just cool down and do something else for a little while. So leaving or changing the situation can be effective. If you have a problem that you're stewing on and frustrated on, and then you actually solve the problem, so you've changed the situation, you've actually solved the problem, then the stressor is no longer present and you're able to relax and feel not overwhelmed again. This is the typical way that most of us deal with overwhelm, and it's a very practical way and it's an important way. The other control point that you always have in any situation with overwhelm is how you look at that situation. So if you look at the situation differently, then the same stressor may not be so overwhelming. It may be toned down a bit. And this can happen, for example, it's a little harder with physical things like noise and social overwhelm. There may be just a limit that gets reached, especially for us HSPs. But especially with emotional types of overwhelm, there's often a lot of interpretation going on, like an emotional interpretation happening inside in any charged situation. And so even if you leave the argument, you may still be carrying that with you, and it may still be overwhelming to you outside of the actual physical argument. But if you can find a way to look at that situation differently, look at what's going on differently, look at what the person is meaning or saying differently, if you can expand your mind a little bit to see this from a broader perspective or to see a different point of view, which often HSPs are very good at doing, then this can soften that experience. And it may not remove it completely, but it might. Sometimes it'll remove it absolutely completely. And just what you thought was a stressor is just not a stressor anymore. These kind of transformations are kind of miraculous in a way. And there's something that I see day in and day out when I facilitate people in doing the work of Byron Katie, which gets you to look in the opposite direction of what you normally think about a situation. It gets you to open your mind to what's really going on. And if you can find that it's actually not a bad thing, or that it's not as dramatic as you may have thought, then something can start to relax inside. And then the overwhelm goes down, in this case, without actually changing the situation, without actually removing the stressor. This is super important because you can't always change a situation. You can't always leave a situation, but you can always try to look at it from different points of view. And that means that no matter what is happening, you have a lot more control to not be stressed. Like that choice is available once you start exploring it. So how do you gain resilience in facing overwhelming situations? Obviously, as we just mentioned, removing yourself, changing a situation, solving a problem, these are all great ways, but can't always do it. And the way of looking at something differently is very helpful because it addresses our thinking. There's two aspects that cause overwhelm in any situation. One is the overwhelming situation itself, and there's not too much we can do about that, a little bit. But often there's something on top of the actual situation. So let's say there's a loud noise that is really annoying. That loud noise causes overwhelm to a certain degree just because of its physical presence. But my thinking about that noise adds on top of the overwhelm that the physical is creating, it adds another layer of overwhelm because now I'm emotionally getting triggered on top of it. So it's the resistance to it, the fighting with the overwhelming experience that can amp it up to a whole nother level. And so there's an overwhelming situation, and then there's my overwhelming thinking about the overwhelming situation. This is what I like to think of as like a double whammy. We've got two overwhelming things happening now, and now it's going to just spiral out of control. So yes, I can try to get myself out of the situation. That's helpful, necessary in many cases. But regardless of whether I'm able to do that, I can always start playing with my thinking. I can always start looking at it like, okay, how is it not as bad as I think? How is it tolerable? How is it, like pain comes to mind. Like pain is like one of those annoying experiences that can easily cause overwhelm, especially in HSPs. But then there's my thinking about the pain on top of the pain itself. And if I can play with that, if I can loosen that, if I can question that, I often find that the actual experience is just, there's pain there, but it's without this emotional component, which makes it way more overwhelming. So again, I love the work of Byron Katie. That's my favorite way of working with thinking, questioning thinking, and opening up my mind to the fact that the reality is not really as terrible as I thought. In fact, often it's just fine. There are, of course, many ways to work with your thinking, and even just meditating, even just getting quieter, you will naturally start seeing through some of this. But what I love about the work is that it allows you to focus on a really specific stressful moment and find that peace inside of that specific kind of situation. So finally, I want to leave you with an idea that is something borrowed from bodybuilding, if you want to consider that, and how that can actually improve your mental health. So the idea, if you've ever lifted weights or done any kind of exercise, you start out with a certain amount of strength. And if you want to build your strength, then you kind of stress yourself a little bit by working a little bit harder than you normally would. And then you recover, and then you work out again, and then you recover. And over time, you start building more and more strength. You can do more repetitions, you can go longer, you have a greater ability. What's interesting to think about here is that when you're talking about general life situations, there's a certain strength that can be built. Now, we'll always be highly sensitive people. That's a personality trait. It's not anything wrong with us. There's nothing we have to change. But the the quality of being highly sensitive is different than being stressed. Just because you're sensitive doesn't mean you have to be stressed. And what stress means is that you've gone further than you were capable of handling. You've gone to the point of overwhelm. If a bodybuilder did this, they would be lifting more weights than they're actually capable of lifting. And so they can strain themselves, they can cause all kinds of problems. And of course, it's going to be frustrating as well. But what bodybuilders do is they just back it down a little notch. Okay, yeah, I'd like to be stronger, but I'm just going to work within my means. And so right now I can only lift this amount of weight. I'm only going to lift that weight and maybe go just push the boundary a little bit, but I'm not going to go overboard. And so as HSPs, because so many things can cause overwhelm, it's important for us to notice where our actual ability lies. Like, where is that point where if we go any further, it's going to be too much? And see if we can just stay in that range, like just pushing the edge, but not going too far. And this takes awareness. It takes some paying attention. But if you can pay attention, you can actually begin to expand your ability to handle situations. And what I mean by this, again, I'm a big proponent of the work of Byron Katie because it allows you to deal with the stress part. Sensitivity will still be there, but the stress part starts to get dealt with when you question your thinking in a particular situation. So what I like to do is go into a situation. Maybe I went in and it was too much for me. Okay, great. I got overwhelmed. Let me step back out of that situation. And now let me write down my thinking that was going on in that situation. And let me work with that. Let me question those thoughts. And let me see if I can, in theory and in experience, in a kind of meditative way, go back into that situation and find new ways of experiencing it. That's going to give me some new strength. Then I'll go back into the situation again, maybe another situation that's similar, and we'll see whether I get overwhelmed or not. Maybe it might take more to overwhelm me. Maybe I won't get overwhelmed at all, or maybe I will. In either case, I'm going to notice, and if I did get overwhelmed, come back and do some more work. And so this back and forth, just staying within my ability level, will allow me to gain momentum and gain strength. And I've watched this with many clients, watched this with myself, where what used to be something that would trigger me doesn't even trigger me at all anymore. And that's amazing. That's strength. And it doesn't mean that I'm not sensitive. Still super sensitive, but I'm not getting overwhelmed because my thinking is not going crazy and it's not reacting the way it was. So there you have it. Basically, we have three things that we looked at here today. One was that you have two main control points for overwhelm in any situation. One is to leave or change the situation, and the other is to look at it differently. The second was how to gain resilience in facing overwhelming situations. And that can be done by working on the thinking, which is that variable which we have more control over than the situation even. Of course, removing yourself from the situation is also very helpful as well. And finally, this concept from bodybuilding of move into the stressor, move back out of the stressor, move in, move out, and keep building your strength so that you may be able to experience a previously stressful situation as non-stressful. That, for me, is the miracle of this simple process of doing the work of Byron Katie, seeing something completely different. And it's not just an intellectual process, it's something that you come to experience, you walk yourself through. And those kind of changes really stick.